we've sort of seen broad, like, Republicans are gaining with black men, Democrats are losing, or Democrats are losing black men, Democrats are losing with young people, especially, again, with the response to Israel's war on Gaza. But just like, you're a pollster, so what are you seeing out there? And how much of it is, I mean, are people actually convinced that Trump was better for the economy? Are you kidding?
Yeah, that's hard to believe. But some people do believe it. They look at it, they say, well, we were doing better under Trump, when, again, unlikely. And obviously you have the impact of the pandemic, but
Yeah.
And for all that, you also have to forget about the whole authoritarian thing, which is interesting because he's leaning into that so much more this time than he was. If you look at the 3 times Trump has run, 16, where basically he was first telling people that he was going to win the Republican primary, and then he said, I'm going to go the middle, and I'm going to run like a businessman. And then he got out of the primary, realized that it was really fun getting people fired up with racism, sexism, everything else. And he got addicted to it. And he governed as more of an extremist. He ran as more of an extremist in 2020. And this time he's gone so much further. Mr. Dictator for a day. I'll be a dictator, day one dictator.
Just one day.
Right. And so it's hard to believe that people are looking at that and saying that that's where they want to go. I think from the polling perspective, I think the one thing we have to keep in mind is, even though we're here in January talking about this presidential race, most Americans are not really tuning that much into this race
at
this point. Yeah,
Good
which is the healthy thing to do, right? Because they have more immediate concerns, and it's such a clown show in so many ways. From a polling perspective, it's a little bit like if I asked you, are you going to eat the mashed potatoes before the stuffing on Thanksgiving? You might tell me what you think you might do. You might tell me what you think I want to hear, if you thought I had a strong feeling about that. Or you might tell me something that, you just have a strong feeling today about the stuffing, and that's going to change. My point is, what we're seeing in the polling is going to change.
Yeah.
And yes, you are seeing in the polling that key components of the Democratic coalition, as Simon Rosenberg, friend of mine, says all the time, the Democratic coalition is wandering in some ways. And that's absolutely true. Their younger voters of color, are looking at this and saying, are these my choices? Does that mean that that's where they will end up? I think, to me, the question will be, when the stakes are clear, and when we get to October, November, and it's in the end, these are the two, these are your choices, who are you going to vote for? I do think you will see, for the most part, Democratic coalition coming back together in the face of Trump's authoritarian campaign. But it's going to be a long path. And the Biden campaign certainly has a lot of work in front of them. I'm confident they understand that, but it's going to be a lot of work.
I've heard whispers that their their ground team is not that strong yet. I mean, I know it's just January, but I don't know. That's a rumor. I am curious about voter turnout. I've predicted a low voter turnout, but again, you're right. Trump brings people out to the polls, whether for or against him. That's what he has, right? He has a fervent base who will vote for him, but then he also has fervent people who are freaked out. Fervently freaked out of another Trump administration. And I feel like 2020 was the first election where, because if you asked me before 2020, I'm like, look, if you're running for president, you got to have something. You got to offer a vision. You got to offer a plan. Look at Obama. Look at Trump. They were outsiders. They had a vision. Trump's vision is heinous, but he still had one, right? And then you have Biden. And Biden truly didn't have to have a vision. He just had to be like, I believe the pandemic is real, and I'm not him. And it seems like Democrats are almost banking on that once again, which I feel like is a little bit playing with fire.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at turnout, 2020 had a record high, where it was the highest turnout presidential election in, I think, 60 years, 80 years. It was incredibly high. One of the big reasons for that, beyond the dynamic you mentioned, I think it was a big component, right? That everything felt like it was at stake, was we actually made it easier for people to vote. Because of the pandemic, we did this And credit to election officials around the country who made it easy for people to vote by mail, or like they did in Houston, where they actually had drive-through voting. Republicans actually tried to make it so those votes weren't counted, because they said there was a law that said that a ballot has to be cast inside a structure. So they put a little roof up that you drive through.
My God. Oh my
but
God.
my point is, they did interesting, creative things to make it so people could vote
Yes.
in a relatively safe manner and an easy manner. Unfortunately, many of these states have rolled these back since then, not shockingly, and actually made it harder to vote again, thinking about Georgia, Texas, states like that. So you have that dynamic that would suggest that turnout will likely be lower than 2020. And then the only thing that I can point to that I look at it and say, well, maybe turnout will get to those levels, or maybe in some cases it'll go over, is the Dobbs decision. And this is the first presidential election since Roe v. Wade has been overturned. We saw what impact that had in 2022 and in the handful of elections that happened in 2023, where voter turnout, especially pro-abortion rights voters, really came out to vote. If Democrats are able to make it clear that abortion rights are effectively on the ballot everywhere, because they are. I think one of the scary things, Republicans have come out and said it. They have this, you've talked about this before, but the Project 2025 or whatever it is, their plan that they put out there, it's on the internet, that they say this is what we're going to do.
You can be in the Trump administration.
Yes. Yeah. 5,000 people, Trump loyalists, ready to come into the
administration, militia, tomato,
right. Call what you want. Call what you will. But part of that plan is they say, look, we don't need to pass any new laws in these states, and states like New York and California that say it's okay, abortion rights won't be overturned here because we have Democratic leadership. They say, oh no, there's this actually a law that was already passed in the 1800s, the Comstock Act, that actually says if enforced, that is illegal to by mail deliver the means of abortion. And so Republicans have said in this thing that is out there in the public that that's all they need to do, is have a Department of Justice, a Trump Department of Justice, that just says, we're going to enforce this law.
Jesus Christ.
Sure, it's 160 years old, but we'll enforce it, and abortion will be banned everywhere. So the question is, can we as Democrats get that message out there? Can we be disciplined enough about that to your point, actually inspire people to come out to vote? You know, there has to be a vision there.
I mean,
right. There has to be a vision
fear.
behind that. Right.
Exactly. I mean, it reminds me of the idea floated when Dobbs' decision came down, which was, why not have clinics on federal land? Couldn't, you know, Biden attempt to do that? And it was like, no, we can't. It's like, to Yamanika's point, look at the right. They're picking up some old ass piece of legislation, or like, ooh, look, we can obliterate your laws, override your laws in blue states, and we can outlaw abortion and go after abortion providers everywhere. Yay. And so totally, you're right. I do think a lot of women, especially in red states, are going to come out to vote. I hope that I hope the Republicans are scared. But I'm also like, I need a vision from the Biden administration on what they're going to do to secure abortion rights. It cannot. And again, and back to the thing that we looked at, you know, and I think we've talked about this, about what allowed Biden to win in the first place, was also the overwhelming number of young people and people of color that came out in droves for Biden, and what was going on at the same time. And not all of them were motivated by the BLM movement, but many of them were, because you saw like National Guardsmen and police and these, you know, police unions, all Trumpers who were just cracking skulls of young people, of Black people, and loving it and relishing. You saw an extrajudicial killing up in Washington, like really scary shit that we're like, ooh, no, like, and if you're Biden, man, what have you done for prison reform and police reform?
To be clear, I would take it a step further. That was the ground game for the Biden campaign. When during the pandemic and the campaign wasn't able to organize in person, BLM, and we tracked this. We actually put out a study after George Floyd's murder. You saw literally within 2 days in Georgia, you saw this surge in voter registration among younger voters and voters of color in Georgia. And then we saw that spread around the country. That was 100%, you charted out, it was 100% connected to BLM.
Yeah.
And without that, you look at how close Georgia was, 10,000 votes, Arizona, Nevada, all just a handful of thousands of votes. We would have had a different outcome. We would be in the midst of Trump's second term now. without that. So it's incredibly important to be clear about that.
That makes me so worried. I mean, we're going to have to see a lot more out of Biden and even the vice president, to Yamanika's point. I mean, at least she could do. Are you drinking mate?
It's a bubbly.
Oh, that looks like a yerba mate, and I was about to freak out. But I support your bubbly out of your straw. Tom, we're totally going to have you back very soon. But any other final words, thoughts, observations before we let you go?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had words of wisdom here. It's going to be a brutal year. I think that's the thing that I think we all are clearly resigned to here, is the notion that we're in for almost 11 more months of this, and unfortunately, it's not going to get better. We'll see what happens tonight. I will say, just as an aside, I don't, Trump's going to win. There's like a very small percentage chance if Nikki Haley could win anywhere, it'll be in New Hampshire, where unaffiliated voters can vote, and Joe Biden isn't on the ballot, so Democrats don't really have a reason to go out and vote.
That's right.
So I'm not predicting it. I'm saying like there's like a 10% chance. Even if she does win there, all it means is it prolongs this primary. I'm still pulling for that, if nothing else.
Sure. Make it a little bit more interesting for us.
Right. Well, and if Trump wins tonight, and again, people may be watching this in the future where that's already happened, it means the general election is on. It could be tomorrow morning we wake up and the general election is on, and it's going to be a brutal, grinding election. And unfortunately, I know people get sick of hearing that this is the most important election ever, because we're just in the sequence of election after election, but here we are.
Yeah, here we are. I still have, people have more questions maybe when you come back. I think one thing you said to me before I let you go, before we went live, was like that you thought maybe that AOC or another candidate would have like filed correctly. But basically, what did you mean by that? I just wanted clarity that a third party candidate, or excuse me, a primary challenger could have come into this race and like maybe done things the right way. What did you mean when you said that?
Well, we were talking about the primary and the fact that people are complaining that Florida said Joe Biden's the nominee. He's the only one on the ballot. Tennessee, Wisconsin have done the same. And then we talked about New Hampshire, and like Dean Phillips, especially Democratic candidate running in the primary, Democratic member of Congress who has been running, I think, just because he really loves being on TV. He's complaining and saying how anti-democratic it is. But in reality, there were rules there. He didn't abide by them. Someone like you mentioned, AOC, someone who actually went out there, did the organizing work, as I know she would, raise the money, got supporters. They would run a smarter campaign. They'd be on the ballot. I think Dean Phillips is just enjoying his moment. The other day, he said that if he doesn't beat Biden in the primary, no labels would take him, he would run in the general. And then his campaign had to come out today and say, no, ixnay on that. Like that's not a great message in New Hampshire for the Democratic primary.
Well, they might want Haley. We will see. That is going to be fascinating. I agree with you. I do think I would just love to see how pissed Trump would be if Nikki Haley won New Hampshire.
It'd be great.
So pissed, so mad. New Hampshireites, they are kind of cray. Like they do some crazy shit like you wouldn't expect. I've talked to them and they're weird.
Well, and we talk about polling. It's just really hard to poll in general. We know polling is already pretty messed up and not the most accurate thing out there. Well, trying to poll in a Republican primary where you don't know, unaffiliated voters can vote in either primary. So, that's the only reason I'm saying there might be a surprise there is that dynamic. We'll see. We'll find out in a few hours.
What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.